So again, welcome to Dialogue with the Daughters Live. This is our very last session. It's the fourth. We've held them every once a week for the whole month, and this is our last session. So your last opportunity to get in questions live. So we will begin with introducing the panelists, starting with, I'll change the view to where everyone can see the panelists. So we will begin with Alilia Bundles. She's not here with us at the time. She's coming and joining later, but Alilia Bundles is the great granddaughter of Madam C.J. Walker. Her episode was called Madam C.J. Walker and a Family Legacy of Pioneers. She is the author of the autobiography that inspired Self-Made. That's the Netflix series about her great grandmother, I should say, Madam C.J. Walker, who was an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, an activist, and a hair care industry pioneer. Alilia Bundles taught in her episode, she talks about her direct lineal descent from two Revolutionary War patriots through her biological grandmother, Fairy Mae Bryant, who was adopted by Alilia, nee McWilliams Walker, the only daughter of Sarah Breedlove, who we all know as Madam C.J. Walker, and she became known as Madam Walker, Mae Walker. Alilia shares stories about how her ancestors, who descended from American Revolution soldier Ishmael Roberts, were pioneers that migrated from North Carolina to Indiana and created free people of color settlements in the early 1800s. She talks about also her connection to the Revolutionary War patriot Thomas Archer. Next, we have Dymond Bush. Dymond, and her title of her episode was Sports Librarian, 10th Generation Rhode Islander, I Belong Here. Dymond is our youngest woman in the Daughter Dialogue study. She is in her late 20s and discusses portraying Marian Anderson at 8 years old in a Black history production, and then reconciling DAR's history of exclusion to join the DAR as a millennial. She talks about her mixed race Spanish, Native American, and Black Revolutionary War patriot, Michael Anthony, who served in the 1st Integrated Regiment, and her 5th great uncle, Elisha L. Anthony Jr., who was a free person of color who served in Louisiana as a Union Army private in the Civil War, and his deathbed letter. She talks about that. And she also talks about serving as the regent, which is the leader of her DAR chapter in Rhode Island. We also have Charlotte Chatfield. The title of hers was Clinical Trials, which is very relevant right now, White Female Ancestors, Black Child in 1871. Charlotte shares stories about her white three greats grandmother, Mary Pendergrass, who had a child with a Black man, Abe Horton, in 1871, and descended from Revolutionary War patriot William Lindsay Durham, whose grandson is the namesake of the city in North Carolina. Mary and Abe's child, Lavinia, she talks about how Mary and Abe's child, Lavinia, married a Black man, Rob, and the couple residing in Pendergrass property in Orange County, North Carolina, and Rob holding a great deal of land. She talks about her Welsh ancestry, descending from free people of color of Chatham County, North Carolina, who trace back to the patriarch, Moses Myrick of Wales. Joining the U.S. Navy, where she learned air traffic control, and her career in clinical trials, working as an associate director at a major pharmaceutical firm managing reported adverse events. We have Shari Phillips. The title of her episode was Farmer's Daughter, Fueling Lincoln's Assassin, Christiana Riot. Shari talks about her family's effect on Abraham Lincoln's assassin during an intertwined story in the 1851 Christiana Riot battle in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, at the home of her paternal ancestors, William and Eliza Parker, who were self-emancipated slaves from Maryland and abolitionists who were protecting fugitive slaves. the battle resulting in the demise of slave master Edward Gorsuch, who attempted to reclaim the fugitives under the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which was negotiated by her maternal relative, U.S. Senator Henry Clay. So the killing of Gorsuch fueled John Wilkes Booth to assassinate President Abraham Lincoln. Frederick Douglass assisted her ancestors to reach the Elgin settlement in Canada on the Underground Railroad. She also presented My Journey to DAR at the Elgin settlement for former and emancipated slaves in Ontario, Canada, at their annual homecoming event. She talks about her Uncle Pole serving in the Union Army as a United States colored troop soldier at Camp Nelson, and growing up on a dairy farm in Lapeer, Michigan, living in an 1846 farmhouse, and founding a law practice at age 55. And we have back again is Nikki Williams Sebastian with a different twist this week. Her episode was called Uncovering and Telling Unknown Stories. It's Complicated. So Nikki shares stories about her ancestor, a thoroughbred racehorse trainer of Lecomte. His name was Hark West, who in 1854 defeated Lexington in New Orleans. She talks about breaking the 1870 brick wall by finding ancestor Zachariah Harris, who joined the Union Army as a United States colored troop soldier at guess where? Camp Nelson, Kentucky, and was awarded Jefferson Davis's property for his service. But the land was taken back by the United States government. And she talks about the importance of enriching the American narrative by sharing unknown stories. So welcome again, ladies. And I want to remind the participants again, for some of you who just joined, if you want to ask a question, please put it in the Q&A. I see that we have a couple that are already queued up as far as questions. That is awesome. And we will get to those. And in the meantime, we will start with the questions that were asked in the beginning, submitted prior to tonight. So we will start with a question for Shari. This one is an individual question for you about growing up in the farmhouse. So you grew up in the farmhouse that you described in the in your episode, your podcast episode. Can you share about your father's experience in the dairy industry? And to help narrow the question, did racism show up in unique ways in his job? Was he a part of any dairy groups? What is he most proud of about being a dairy farmer?
Okay, multiple part questions.
Yes. So let's start with, did racism show up in unique ways in his job as a dairy farmer?
I think racism shows up everywhere from time to time. So I would answer that question as yes. But when it does show up, I don't think I think it's overcomable until you get to the finances. So if it shows up at the bank, at the lender, those kind of situations, it's very important for a farmer, because farming is a cycle. So, it's the same every year. You start off, you go and borrow money so you can get your crops in. If you can't get that money, or if it comes late, then you're going to miss your season. You're going to miss the planting season. You're going to, it's just a spiral after that. So when it shows up in finances, I think that's the worst, but it probably shows up in other places. But those other places where it shows up is overcomable.
And how about, did he belong to any dairy groups?
The lifestyle of farming is all consuming. So dairy groups, there's annual meetings, like at the dairy, they have an annual meeting. There's an annual meeting at the cooperative. That's where you take your crops, your grain, your corn to market at the co-op. There are annual meetings at the Farm Bureau, which is an association. You can get insurance there and different products that you need in life. But it's not like something that you go every week or every month, you know, it's once in a while, because as a farmer, your job is to produce, and you can't produce if you're sitting in a meeting, you know, and literally you're working from very early in the morning till very late at night every day. So there's not a lot of time for anything that's not productive. You know what I mean? Can't hear you.
What was he most proud about?
I
About
think
being a dairy farmer.
I think he's most proud even today. He's 90. He'll be 96 on his next birthday. I think he's most proud that he was an excellent steward of the land. And you know, there's an organization. I think it might be in Minnesota or Wisconsin, but some kind of national organization that every year they view a certain piece of land every year. And it so happens that a part of my father's farm has been viewed for quite a long time. And so someone came from that organization and actually spoke to my father and complimented him on his stewardship of the land.
Thank you.
I think he's most proud of that. He likes his farm to be pretty, well-groomed, productive, and that's how he spent his life.
Thank you. So guess who's joined us? It's Alelia Bundles. Alelia,
Hi.
I've introduced you so everyone is aware of who you are. I reminded them of you and your story. And so we just finished the first question, which was directed at Shari. And now I have some questions that are directed towards each of the panelists. Why is it important to update the narrative that African Americans were more than slaves? What effect does it have on Blacks here in America to assume that we all descend from slaves? So that's what we're told, right, in history, that we all descend from slaves. Why is it important for Black people to understand that that's not always the narrative for African Americans? And what effect does it have on whites to assume that all Black people descend from slaves and that there weren't these free people of color or possibly Black people without slavery in their history? Why is it important to tell that story? Let's start with Alelia. You just joined. I'm gonna put you right in the fire.
Sure. So, you know, in addition to making sure that people don't have, that's the only narrative, even that narrative really needs to be updated and reframed, because people now are no longer saying, you know, these were plantations, they were forced labor camps. I mean, to really reframe the way that people were treated during slavery, and that it wasn't the same every place, and it wasn't the same over a period of time. And I certainly know that in my history book in high school, it said the slaves were contented. Well, we know that that wasn't true. We know that people were trying to fashion their lives, that they were escaping, that they were never contented. They might have put on a facade about that. But yes, it's important to know that there were people who were enslaved and they had to deal with that. They made the best of it. They made families, and that there were indeed people who were free people of color, who, some of whom are some of our ancestors, and certainly mine, who were men who were in the Continental Army. But it's important. And I think right now there's such a huge backlash to telling these stories accurately, that as soon as we get in a position to try to tell the stories accurately, that there are people who really don't want to hear that narrative, because it changes their view of themselves and takes them out of being in charge of everything forever.
Thank you. Shari?
The first question was, what effect does it have on Blacks?
Yes, here in America, to know that, or to assume that we all descend from slaves. What effect does that have to just only know that narrative, and not that we had these free people of color that joined armies, that built their own schools, that migrated from North Carolina to Indiana and had their own churches? And why is that important to know?
I think it's important to know because we are all people. So you can't just make generalizations, no matter who you are. And, you know, even if, um, we did descend from slaves, it doesn't mean that we had a slave mentality. Many times we did not, just as Alelia just mentioned. It was just like depending on the time when you come to America, you don't have the language, you don't know the geography where you are. Um, you know, um, there are a lot of impediments, distance, getting to a place where you can exercise your freedoms like a normal person. So, but I think I think I'm particularly proud that some of my ancestors were able to just like defy that and to express themselves. And they were brave enough, had enough backbone to do that. And I'm extremely proud of that.
Thank you. Dymond?
So I think it's important to update the narrative to help all understand like the richness and fullness of the African American experience historically as well as currently. I think the effect that it has on Blacks to assume that we all descend from slaves is that it sort of inhibits the thought process. I think of the saying like, if you can't see it, you can't be it. So I think some people who only assume that Blacks descend from slaves don't think of themselves as greater, don't think of their people as being striving or in achieving different goals. I think it definitely inhibits the creativity and the goal setting process of Black people. And I think that, yeah, it just helps us dream bigger, dream better.
And why is it important for white people to see us differently?
I think it's important for white people to know that not all Black people are the same. Not all Black people have the same experience, because there's that assumption that we all come from the same thing. So yeah, that Black people are very varied.
Thank you, Charlotte.
I agree with what Dymond said about the way people seeing themselves has a big influence on what they can do later. And I've told people, had I known when I was a child that I descended from free people of color, my outlook probably would have been a little bit different. I didn't feel less than or anything, but when you're in history classes and everything, and all you hear is Black people were enslaved, you know, that's pretty much the whole. You don't hear about the people who, like you said, founded the schools or were free and had agency and had their businesses, and even going back to colonial times, you didn't hear that, and so you just feel a little bit different. And I think the way that's important for non-people of color to understand is because they have a preconceived notion on the Black experience anyway. So they need to know that even from the beginning of this country, we were here and we were free. We had agency, we had businesses, we had families, we lived a little bit differently, and we were able to contribute to the fabric of the society.
And Nikki?
I agree with everyone, of course. And I will add, lastly, that we have to remember that textbooks by design were, they were given to children. There was, how can I say this nicely? With textbooks in schools, there is a concerted effort on the messaging that went into textbook and what children were taught from a very young age. And there are organizations that are groups that are in existence today who are responsible for that type of wording about slaves being content, plantation, they were taken care of, they were cared for. Even to this very day, I can't remember, it was in Texas, I believe, but there was a child that came home and said, "Mom, look what they said about slaves in the book." And the mother got upset, and they had this big ordeal that was in the newspapers about how even to this very day, slavery is being framed. But it is important to update the narrative because we have to think about the next generation. We have to think about the children, because most kids hate history. History is so boring. I don't want to hear about that. That's kids, when they hear stories like that, just naturally repel. are repelled by that. But when you tell children, this is your story, you have free people, your ancestors were slaves, but this is what they did. He ran away, he joined the army, he was a slave, but he had a job and he was able to travel and go places and do what he wanted to do. And one thing that I'm finding out about what slavery really was, I mean, other than the cotton fields and the beatings and the whippings, the reality is that slavery was the taking of Black people's money. And there could, like, I have an ancestor, as I mentioned in my podcast. He was free to travel. He had a family. He would go see his wife, do what he wanted to do. But his job, the job that he did, 8 hours a day, traveling, doing everything, that money was taken from him. He was hired out. And someone else took the money that my ancestor worked and did. And there are other stories about people who were freed. And then, like what Shari mentioned, the Fugitive Slave Act. I've read stories about men who were free, they were living, had set up, had bought a house, and then they, in order to remain free, his former owner found him and said, you have to sell all your, give me all your property, then you can remain free. So that's this kind of stories that we need to keep talking about and saying the different layers of what slavery meant, and even the ramification, the financial ramification to this very day of that. But as far as my personal story about updating the narrative, slavery was about taking the money that Black people work, sun up to sundown, backbreaking work, or carpenters or blacksmiths or horse trainers or whatever the job was. It didn't have to be cotton picking, but someone was benefiting from your labor.
Right, because you said that your horse trainer, the ancestor that was a horse trainer, he was actually enslaved, but he was allowed to train these horses, and you said go and come as he pleased, which was a very different narrative, even though he was enslaved.
Right, but he had someone negotiating his rates, how much he would get paid and how much his clothes would cost, and other people were determining that for him, even though he was the one making these horses, getting these horses across the finish line, winning these big races, but the money went somewhere else. So.
Thank you. I have a question for A'Lelia and Charlotte. It's so interesting that both of your ancestors were free people of color in North Carolina. Do you know if they crossed paths?
You know, I would say Charlotte is much better than I am at the DNA. Well, she knows that.
Well, the answer I have is they had to have, because we share DNA.
Really? Look at that.
We're distant cousins, and it was just, I was happened to log on my ancestry account one day looking at my new matches, and I saw A'Lelia, and I'm like, oh my God.
Am I in there also? Because Charlotte and I share DNA. Well, Charlotte's, our relatives share DNA. So do I share with A'Lelia? Is that the same relative with me?
Different. So this is my dad's paternal side. She's related to me on my dad's maternal side.
Okay.
But our ancestors were in Chatham County. And coincidentally, I have I have cousins who were in the Okinichi Band of the Saponi Nation, which is a Native American tribe in the next county over. And we're all related to each other, 2-3 different ways, come up in DNA matches, a lot of different ways. And we can only ascertain that we probably, and I have ancestors, DNA matches to people in Indiana as well, because in our area where we were in Chatham County, the county was founded by Quakers. And Chatham county is named for it's Pittsboro, named for William Pitt, the Earl of Chatham. So a very heavy Quaker presence in that area.
Do you know if they migrated to Indiana as well as A'Lelia's ancestors?
My ancestors I know some of them did. I have the book.
Okay. I think it's so interesting to think of this visual of Black people in like horse and buggy going across the plains or whatever, and from North Carolina to Indiana, and to set up their own settlements.
Well, it was, after the Nat Turner Rebellion, free people weren't treated so kindly in North Carolina and Virginia, and they had to go. It was just one of those, let's go somewhere else so we can be free and, kind of live our lives in peace.
Right.
And they owned property, they owned farms, they created churches, but really were pushed out of the state. And then when they got to Indiana wasn't all that happy, but Quakers had helped them get there. But they had to register every year with the county. If you were a free person of color, they wanted to know that you were there.
You had to pay for a license. In order to be free, you had to pay for a license every year. And those licenses had to have a bond secured by a white person of good standing in communities. Mm-hmm. But one thing also, Risha, as far as the migration, there are a lot of trails. There were common trails that a lot of free people took. Like my ancestors a different line travel. There was a migration trail of free blacks to St. Louis from West Virginia to St. Louis, Missouri, or to Virginia, West Virginia to St. Louis. And they weren't the first one. They were just traveling the road that other people, set out for them. But yeah, there were all kinds of common routes that free people traveled, as Charlotte and Alelia said, because some states didn't allow you to be free. You had to leave. You had to pay a fine. You had to leave. You had to get a license.
Right.
You were at the whim. Being free, you were at the whim of the legislature every year.
Thank you. So before we go to the Q&A questions that are live, we're going to take a quick poll to see who's on with us tonight. So some of you who have been with us for all 4 sessions or events know that this is coming. So I have launched a poll that asks you, who's on? Are you a DAR member or not? It's pretty simple answers, yes or no. Are you a member of the DAR? We want to know how many people up here are just hearing about daughter dialogues and wanting to join in and be a part of these great oral histories despite having membership in the DAR. So 86% of you have voted. You guys were quick tonight. All right, let's show the answers. Sharing the results. Look at that. It's a good split again. 58% yes, 42% no. We love seeing that. Thank you. And so I'll launch a different poll, my second one. Again, you'll know these questions if you've been here before. How are you affiliated with this? You can pick more than one answer, so please pick all that apply. How are you affiliated with these women? Do you personally know a panelist? Are you just a friend that came to support your buddy? Are you familiar with a panelist indirectly? Let's say you've seen them in genealogy groups or online groups somewhere. Are you a DAR member of color? And I know I asked this before, but are you a DAR member? And again, you can check more than one, check all of them that apply. Are you working on joining the DAR? Or are you not affiliated at all whatsoever? You're just finding out about this, you're following us, and you are not affiliated in any way, but you simply enjoy daughter dialogue. So that's exciting as well to get new people. Wow, 90% have voted already. You guys are fast. Yes. So someone has commented that Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. posted this on Twitter. Yes, he did. He supported this event. Thank you, Professor Gates. He did tweet this out for us and made it public, spread the word for us. So thank you so much. All right. So I'm going to end the polling. 97%. We got great participation tonight. So I'm ending that. I'm going to share the results. Look at this. We've got a lot of people who aren't on, a higher percentage, I should say, than usual, that aren't affiliated and simply enjoy daughter dialogue. So welcome, everyone. All right. So we have some friends too that are friends of the panelists. I love it. It's a nice mix. So let's go back to the Q&A live questions. We have some in the queue, and the top voted answer is, it looks like for Alelia, our family was honored to stay on Madam CJ and Alelia Walker Street in Harlem in fall of 2019 while visiting family in Harlem. Can Miss Alelia Walker please share how the street naming initiative came about?
Sure. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't muted. I'm glad that you stayed on Madam Walker and Alelia Walker Place on 136th Street. And that was where Alelia Walker purchased a house in 1913 and where the Walker Beauty School and Salon and Residence was for many years. But the process of naming a street in New York, there are a few people who really kind of make it their lives work to do the petition, get the petition signed and lobby the members of the city council. So that was a long process. And there was a gentleman who went through that. And then the city council passes it along with several other street renamings. And we finally did the dedication during the summer of 2018 on a day that was 103 degrees. So we weren't able to stay outside. We did it mostly inside the Schomburg, which is nearby. But I'm so glad that you were able to see that sign. It means a lot.
Thank you. Next, we have for Dymond. In Dymond Bush's audio interview, she mentioned her research in a military database available through a local library. What was the name of that database? Thank you.
Yeah, so the database was the fold3.com, and it's available through the library as well. Around like Memorial Day or Veterans Day, they usually have a sale and it's free during those weekends as well. So it's fold3.com.
Thank you. Next, we have, how did you document the lives of free people of color who lived before the 1850 census, which listed family members by name? Anybody want to take that? Charlotte?
I found my ancestor on the 1850 census. He was a child, but the document I found before then was an apprentice bond that was released by the Court of Pleas and Quarter Sessions for the county, and he was bound out to a family because what they did in North Carolina, um, I'm not exactly sure what his family situation was, but sometimes free children of color were bound out to learn trades or to keep them from being on quote unquote welfare, or maybe just even for their own, if they thought they had problem children, to keep them from running amok and kind of keep them out of trouble. They were bound out to different families, and I found his apprentice bond when he was bound out when he was I think 7 years old.
Is anyone? Dymond? Yeah.
So for my Rhode Island free ancestors of color, they were all in records prior to 1850, so that wasn't too much of a challenge. I do have some family that was in Maryland. I believe I used like city directories. They were listed there as well. But then I have like Virginia roots where the 1850 census is like the last place I have them. But yeah, so city directories were helpful. And for New England people, they were already in other records.
I found that too in city directories in St. Louis, Missouri. Because my ancestor, sometimes they listed the occupation, and my ancestor was listed as a barber, colored, and then have colored in the directory, and barber. And I knew the barber. I researched the Barber family, the William Roberson and Frank Roberson. There were famous free people of color barbers in St. Louis, Missouri, and I wrote an article about them. And then also in obituaries, as I mentioned, my ancestor traveled from West Virginia to St. Louis, and in someone's obituary, I saw that they said to please post to Wheeling, West Virginia papers, or please post to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania papers also. And then another record for the same ancestor, I saw him, he worked for the post office in the early 1860s, and I saw the United States government lists all the employees and registers, United States employees registers, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact name of that register, but I saw him listed there saying he's from West Virginia. So sometimes you have a lot of indirect evidence also that you can kind of put together that, you know, cooperate with each other that will help you kind of come to a conclusion. So you got, as Black people in genealogy, you got to think out of the box all the time, but we can get there. You can do it. You can find it.
Yeah, I will say
Oh,
not just the newspapers were very helpful as well.
Shari?
Yes, I just, I found some of the names of my relatives listed in a will. So my patriot died in 1828 and he happened to list slaves by name in it. And I started recognizing a lot of people's names in there, and that's how I found them.
Did anyone prove a patriot of color? We talked about that last session, about two weeks ago, in a live event. But just briefly, I know Dymond and Alelia have patriots of color.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So, you know, in my case, it was a genealogist named Coy Robbins, who African-American in Indiana, who had written about free people of color in Indiana, those folks who moved from North Carolina to Indiana. So Coy really had done all of the research for me on members of my family. And then there is the Paul Heinig book on free people of color in North Carolina and Virginia. And I was able to find them in there. And then they are in the census. And so by the time I got to the point of trying to verify things for the DAR, I actually already had the patriot of color identified.
Okay. The next one is, has DNA testing become a requirement of DAR application? How many of tonight's daughters have used DNA tests? What are the pros and cons of testing? what ancestry DNA firms are used? Did you use? So let's start. There's a couple of questions there. Has it become a requirement? The answer is no, but I'll let if someone else wants to chime in because you guys are the experts. It's not me.
Well, I use
Nikki.
DNA in support of my application, though it did not meet the requirements that DAR currently specifies to use DNA with applications. Right now, if you want to use DNA evidence in support of your applications, you may use autosomal DNA up to the first 3 generations, including yourself. And as we know, autosomal can go up to 4 to 6 generations and be very effective, but DAR only allows it up to the first 3. And for Y-DNA, there are a number of stipulations that you have to have a close male relative who has the same last name that hasn't changed for generations, that traces down from the Patriot. But in my case, I didn't meet those requirements. I had DNA to confirm I had the correct Patriot. I had the correct family. That's what I used DNA for, even though I couldn't use that DNA report for this application because it did not meet the guidelines. But I had male cousins who all matched each other, and there was a cousin who had that last name, but he was a distant cousin, not a close cousin. So I submitted that information anyway, knowing it did not meet the criteria. but I had a death certificate that had the information that was required, but I submitted that anyway just to back up, because as we know, death certificates can be full of garbage a lot of times, and sometimes they're not accepted. But so that's why I sent that, just to help my case. But that was how I use it in my case.
Anybody else use DNA testing?
Yeah.
Not for my application, but I'm in the throes of trying to use it now. It's really important. It's really valuable for the Y DNA analysis. That's the male haplogroup, but it just traces one line. It traces the father's line. With mtDNA, I'm just trying to discover how it's used, but that traces the mother's line. And I think that it can be used to actually trace the movement of people that came once they came into the colonies, where they really were. I think it can be used for that, but I'm just exploring it now. The testing system that does the best job with that, I believe, is Family Tree DNA. They have more rigorous testing standards. There's things called SNAPs and STRPs. And so it's like SNP and STR, something like that they measure. And the other testing services, I guess, don't. And I just discovered Ancestry dropped their paternal haplogroup testing. So I think Family Tree DNA is where everybody is driving to for DNA tests. Is that right?
For Y DNA, definitely.
Anybody else have any?
Well, just an aside, my DNA results led me to dig deeper, because I knew my great grandmother was white, but it was just interesting when 23andMe gave away those 10,000 free test kits to people who are identified as African American. I grabbed one, and so when it came in, 23andMe gives haplogroup information. So if you're a male, you'll get both your Y haplogroup and your maternal, and females, of course, get their maternal haplogroup. And mine came back European, which I knew it would, but it was just interesting to see on paper, and it just led me to do more research.
I think it's going to be valuable for more and more people to go into the group projects on Family Tree DNA, like mtDNA project for L3 haplogroup. That's the mitochondrial haplogroup, is like, I think it's 900 and some people. And then they group them. So, the L3Bs are together, the L3Cs are together, whatever variations. And then you can compare yourself to other people and possibly find a common ancestor, because some people actually have names of their oldest ancestor listed in the projects.
Dymond, I think Dymond was trying to chime in there.
Yeah, I mean, I've tested on DNA, but I haven't really done as much research as everybody else. I just know that like ancestry is really great for me to be able to like connect with other current, I mean, modern alive relatives to try to figure out how we're related.
For the autosomal DNA. Yeah. I use that too.
And
it is very valuable.
There's a question directed for Dymond. Dymond, how can the DAR encourage young women or women your age to become excited about investigating their family history?
So I mean, I've always been interested in history, but I think getting young women involved in the history and then getting them involved in organizations or lineage organizations would be good. Just telling young women that there's a networking opportunity. I know for me, starting out my career, that was one of the things, to one, build my network, and one, to get some new friends. I've made a lot of friends in DAR, and then also connected with people to help me with my career as well. And then as this is a service organization, that's one thing that really drew me in. I know at least the people I know, the other young women I know, they're interested in giving back. So that's one way to sort of get people interested in researching the history, that you research your history and then you can get involved in other organizations like this to further your interests.
DAR will definitely change your life. I have met people I have a group of friends to get through this pandemic that we're in, some DAR friends, and we're all checking on each other. Because of DAR, I have joined other lineage societies from people who encouraged me to keep looking and doing other things. So, but yes, it'll change your life. Seriously, in a very good way.
And I like what Dymond said, is that when they're very young, not very young, but when they're young women and they're starting off in their career or building their careers, yes, they tend to join what I'm hearing you say is that they join organizations where they think that they can get value out of their time, and that is to advance their career. So who am I going to meet that's going to possibly get me connected to the career that I want to go, or the path that I want to go? Is that correct, Dymond?
Yeah, that's definitely correct.
Thank you. How many of tonight's daughters have worked with a paid, or did you pay a professional genealogist?
I paid a professional genealogist, but I wasn't happy with the results, so I went and did it myself.
Anybody paid anyone?
I did. I had a similar experience. There was something that I was really trying to discover, and I really had hit a wall, and the person didn't find any more than I did. So I went back to the drawing board. But I have a lot of respect for people who really know what they're doing.
No, there are very good people out there, but sometimes people are not going to be as enthused and devoted to your family research, so more than you are. So,
Charlotte, you were saying something?
I did. I did all my research, and I had a professional. I had her looking for a specific ancestor I was looking for. I wanted her to find more information. But as I was doing, we became friends, and as I was doing my DAR paperwork, I just had her, as I got the information, I just had her vet it for me. And she looked at it twice and she's like, well, this is exactly right. And it got kicked back anyway, but that's another story.
We have a question that they know that Dymond is from Rhode Island. Would other panelists share where they are members or where they're located? Let me try. Okay. Shari is in Michigan. Nikki is in Georgia. Alelia is in Washington, D.C. Charlotte, I know your ancestors are North Carolina. Where are you now?
Currently outside of Princeton, New Jersey.
Okay, there we go. Almost got everybody right. Okay, perfect. Let's see. Have any panelists joined the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution? So it's National Society Daughters of the American Revolution project through Family Tree DNA. If so, have you found other members who share matches with you?
I have.
Is that how we found each other, Charlotte? I think. No, we just looked individually.
Well, first is the question: did you join it through the project? Did you join Did you join the NSDAR project through Family Tree DNA?
We have to be a member of DAR to join that project, that's not true, because your family members can join who are not members, But somebody has to be a member of DAR to be in that project. Somebody in your family needs to be.
And so you found other, did you find other members? I'm sorry.
Can you just self-nominate yourself into that project? I didn't see it on there, but, or is it a secret one or a private one?
Nikki.
No, it's NSDAR. You can search for it and someone will, you sent the request and someone will admit you in there.
Okay.
But it's there, NSDAR.
I don't think it's on the list. I don't remember seeing it. Is it?
It's there.
Okay.
You have to provide your information and provide your patrons information, and they have to make sure that you're a vetted member. You have a patron before you can get into the database. But I was able to add my mom and my grandmother, and they're not members, but I am. But I joined under my maternal line, so.
Okay, and I see someone submitted a question through the chat. Again, if you want to make sure that we have your question in front of us, please put it in the Q&A and not the chat. I just so happened to see it pop up. And the question is, has anyone submitted their DNA to GEDmatch, free website collaborating all commercial sites?
I have. I put all the kits that I manage on there just about, but I haven't done it recently.
I did have all of my kids there, but I removed them all, but I need to put them all back again.
I'm not sure if this was a chat that ended up in Q&A, or I'm not sure if it's a question, but I'll just read it. Didn't some of the ancestors of free Black descendants arrive via the transatlantic slave trade? So captured on African soil, shipped and stepping foot on North America as captives. Knowing, of course, this history is nuanced. Does anybody have any comments on that? I'm not sure if it's a question, or does anybody want to comment on that? It came through the Q&A.
So the question is basically whether people who came over on the Middle Passage and came here as enslaved people, did we have ancestors who eventually were free?
So it says, so captured on African soil, shipped and stepping foot on North America as captives. Didn't some of the ancestors of free Black descendants arrive? So I guess they're asking, are we saying our ancestors were free people of color? Didn't they already arrive anyway enslaved? Or do you know if, I guess, ancestors that were Black that came over and remained free? Do you know of any of those stories?
Well, some of them, I don't know of mine in particular, but some of them were enslaved, but most of them, if you look back, particularly in colonial Virginia, they came over as indentured servants before the condition of slavery changed, because what was happening was a lot of the indentured servants and of the color and the white indentured servants, the women, had started to
have babies.
And that's what started all the laws and had made things change, because as they were having children, the free condition of the children usually went with the mother. And it just perpetuated from generation to generation, i.e. Wanda Sykes, the comedian. She's a descendant of a white woman who was an indentured servant who had a baby with a Black man, and the children were free from colonial times.
And I have a clarification from the guest who asked the question. She says, did your free ancestors step on North America free? Did they arrive free and remain free? Did any of your ancestors?
I don't know.
Not that I've found yet.
Right. But I do know that exists in our history, and I'm hoping so that has happened. It has occurred where Blacks that are here today, that have been here since the American or before the American Revolution, some have come over free, remained free, were never enslaved. I'm hoping to document one of those stories if I can find one through our daughter dialogues.
Rick Murphy, he's a member of Sons of the American Revolution. Rick Murphy wrote a book about his ancestors who were on the White Lion, who came here in 1619. And those Africans, I mean, we don't have a story, but Rick certainly has a story. And those Africans came here, their ship was pirated or captured, and they were made indentured servants for a specified amount of time. And then once their time was up, they became, the phrase he used was head right. There was a head right system, and they were granted land themselves. And those Africans hired other people in indentured service, and they became very successful, a number of them. And a number of them, that's where a lot of free Black people, free people of color, descended from those Africans that came here from Angola. in 1619. So I would definitely recommend Rick Murphy's book. I don't remember the name of it, but it came out last year. So there's a story there.
Thank you, Nikki. Here's another question for Dymond. You're popular tonight because you are the young one. So, has Dymond paged at Continental Congress? And what was that experience like for her? So, I want to explain a few of the terminology. Continental Congress is the annual national convention for the Daughters of the American Revolution. It's held in DAR Constitution Hall, which is the largest concert venue in Washington, D.C. It holds nearly 3,000 people. So, about that number of people or women members descend on Washington, D.C. in the summer for Continental Congress. And a page is a woman that is 40 years and below that is able to assist with the business and help, be a helper, and they have to wear all white dresses. And so
there's exceptions sometimes for the age.
I understand, but we're talking about the rule. You can page up to your 41st birthday. I have paged, so I aged out of it, but I did page. And
I did too.
Thank you. So we have anybody else page besides Dymond? I know Nikki. Yes, me, Nikki, and Dymond. Okay, so Dymond, you talk about your paging experience, then Nikki and I will talk about ours because we were pages too. Go ahead, Dymond.
So I went to Continental Congress in 2019 and I didn't page that year because I went with my mom. So I kind of wanted to experience DC and the whole Continental Congress experience with her. So I didn't page that year. I did page last year virtually and I paged for the NSDAR shop. So that was really great to meet women from across the world. We basically promoted the shop online, but I'm looking forward to paging this year if it's in person.
Right.
I page locally as well.
Okay. Nikki, how many years did you page?
Oh, it was just the one time. That was it. I got squeezed in there. I'm at that age cutoff, so
we like to get very competitive about these. How many years did you page? I paged.
No, I got one pen.
I got 3. I paged 3 years. I got in enough just to get 3 in, and I enjoyed every year of it. And it's a fun group, but everybody's 40 years and younger, and you're just kind of enjoying each other and doing things that young people do. And I ran around the floor and was holding doors open for people, closing doors, and I really enjoyed having that camaraderie. And
nice.
yes, it's very nice. And a lot of those friendships last for lifetimes that you make during those times. Joyce Mosley has put in the name of Rick Murphy's book. It's called Arrival of the First African in Virginia.
Thank you.
Arrival of the First African in Virginia by Rick Murphy. Thank you, Joyce. And those are all of our live questions. If somebody has another question, this is your last shot to get in here. I see questions coming in the chat. I'm gonna try to get them out of there, but please do put them in the Q&A. Here's one. Did Dymond mean the junior shop when she said shop?
No, so we had 2 page groups this year. One was for junior shop and one was for the NSDAR shop. So I was the NSDAR shop page.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So
same as I.
Oh, really? Okay. So thank you for I have one more in the Q&A. Let's see. All right. How do you research plantation when looking for ancestors? That's the question. How do you research plantation when looking for ancestors?
There are records of plantations in a lot of manuscripts from plantation records in North Carolina, University of North Carolina, LSU, William and Mary, even in ProQuest, the subscription database. And I don't remember the academic name of the series, but there are plantation records from all of the southern states, but it's not one comprehensive set. It's kind of divided up between what state got what university got what, but I would definitely recommend LSU library, as I mentioned, and William and Mary and University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Definitely start with those for their plantation, antebellum plantation records. Good place to start.
Okay.
You might also check universities because sometimes in the state where the plantation was, the families will clean out the attic and place the papers from that plantation in a university setting.
And then I
Okay.
had two
Mhm.
colleges in Greensboro, North Carolina. The University of North Carolina at Greensboro, they have a record, I think, a record of slaves and a database. And then Guilford College in Greensboro is a Quaker school, and they have a lot of the Quaker records there.
Okay, thank you. We do. Look, we have another question that came in. I love that the ladies are still interested. How has being on a podcast and sharing your family story and family history impacted you? So you've bared your soul, you've told your I know Alelia says that's what I do. That's what she says about herself. So that's her job, is to do that. But she gave us new information about the Patriots of Color, which is different than the stories you tell all the time. So considering that you shared a different part of yourself, I'll start with you, Alelia. How did being on this podcast or sharing your story and family history impact you?
You know, being able to talk with you, Risha, has been great because you're so committed to telling these stories. And I think you've given us a platform to be able to educate people about this slice of American history that most people don't know. So it has introduced me to a lot of other wonderful people, like the people who are on tonight, so that I can learn more about them. So in that way, I am very grateful to you.
Thank you. Charlotte?
Well, as Lily said, it gets us out there, gets our stories out there. It'll be in the library at, is it Harvard?
Schlesinger Library for Women. Yes.
So our stories will go on, so people could understand even 10, 15, 20, 50 years down the road that we were here.
And have any of your family listened to it? And did you get any kind of feedback, or did something change in your life after you recorded it? Any reactions from family members, or they just kind of said that Charlotte told our story and we're supportive of it? Kind of what was their feeling?
My husband listened. He just thought it was interesting. But I don't know if many family members outside of Facebook have listened to it, because my parents don't get online or anything. So if they were to hear it, I have to play it for them.
Okay. Dymond, did you get any response or reactions from anyone?
Yeah, so I mean, my family members have listened. I know Rhode Island DAR, they've shared it in their group, like the State Society. So they love that. I guess Rhode Island's a little bit in the spotlight. But I think it's really important that, like, I feel proud that, like, my family's history will live on. It's in the Harvard Schlesinger Library. Like, it's there forever. So that's what I'm really, really proud of. And then just getting to share this, like, to hopefully other young women involved in DAR. I know I had a cousin who was 18 years old who I just met through this. She heard about it and she, like, may want to join DAR. So just trying to get more young women involved.
Nikki?
I've shared with my family. They love it. I have two cousins that I'm currently working on. I'm building their applications from the website. I'm just grateful that you're telling stories, like everyone said, because it's not what we hear. You're not going to read about this, at least not now, in textbooks. And there are a lot of people writing books about their family stories. Like I mentioned, Rick, that I mentioned earlier. I know LaBrenda Garrett Nelson and Bernice Bennett. All these people are writing all these books about the stories that we don't find. So I appreciate you doing this, and I appreciate you keeping me getting dressed and putting my face on during this pandemic that we can't get out and get anywhere or do anything since a year now. So having this to get dressed up for is great. So I want to appreciate and thank you for that also.
I have a follow on to that as a comment, but later. I'll let Shari answer first.
Well, this daughter dialogue, the podcast that we did, it was a big change for me because our family culture is that, you don't share that kind of information, publicly. So it was a big step. But my mother, who is still living, she reviewed it too. And it's her family that my Patriot line falls on. And she approved of it. So I felt more comfortable. but placing it in the Schlesinger Library for Women in History, I think is the title of the library. I am very proud of that. And I think that future generations, not even from my family, just people in the future will appreciate the narratives that we have all placed on file there. And it's because of you, Risha. You pulled it together and thought of this, So I'm very grateful for you for
Thank
having
you.
come up with this
I
project.
I remember, thank you. I remember when you said, I need my mother to review this recording first, because when I record the oral histories, I have a copy that I give to every woman before, or the daughter, before I release it and go live. So the daughter has a chance to review it before it's published. And you had concerns. You said, I want my mother to hear this first. And that was interesting and different, that you wanted to make sure that you had her approval before we went public with this. So that I understand.
It's some people are embarrassed about their history, their ancestry. It's a very touchy subject in some families.
Right.
That's because what they read in the textbook.
And Lily, I want you to talk about the library, because you have a connection to, I didn't find this out until after I started this project. I'm going down the list of who am I going to interview next. I come across Alelia, we get to talking, and then tell me about your connection to the Schlesinger Library.
Really, the reason that I was late this evening is that I was on a goodbye party for the executive director of the Schlesinger Library, Marilyn Dunn, who's just a really dear person. But I went to Harvard and Radcliffe, and I've been on the advisory board at the Schlesinger for many years. It is a really wonderful place. It's great that these oral histories are going to be there, but it's also the place where Angela Davis's papers are, where Polly Murray's papers are, where my papers are going to be. So it's an amazing repository for women's history.
And isn't that so serendipitous that I had no clue until I met Alelia? And right. And it was already I had arranged it to be deposited there. So Nikki, to follow on to this, thank you for forcing you to get dressed up during the COVID pandemic that you haven't done in a year, and you did it a couple of times. We have a comment or a question that says, I know that you all are busy. However, is there any way this meeting can continue at least once a month? I really enjoyed these meetings. So, Lawan, that is very flattering, but I encourage you to listen to the Daughter Dialogues episodes that are coming out on the podcast. Season 2 starts next week. You will be able to get your fix.
It won't Batchelor.
Right. It won't be a live fix, but trust me, you will get a lot of information. You'll have a lot to keep up with. Some people fall behind in listening to their episodes. So come and listen to the podcast, which is found on basically wherever you get your podcast. Go to daughterdialogues.com and go to the tab for dialogues is the easiest place to get it. Daughterdialogues.com. Go to dialogues, or you can get on Apple Podcast, Spotify. It doesn't matter. Wherever you can get a podcast, you will be able to listen to Daughter Dialogues. It's released every Thursday. And again, season 2 starts next Thursday. And let's see.
Can I say one thing, Risha, about Tulane? Someone mentioned Tulane in the comments.
Yes.
And I have to fix that before I get kicked out of the Alumni Association. I went to Tulane University, and Tulane's Amistad Research Center also has an abundance of records. And I made the mistake of mentioning LSU first before I mentioned my alma mater, Tulane. So I want to correct that. Go to Tulane first and then go to LSU's library.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. We have a comment that says, this has been wonderful, enlightening, and humbling. Thank you to each of you. So that's one of the comments. Question here. I don't have the answer. Maybe somebody can help us with this. Is there a documentary forthcoming of the Daughter Dialogues? It would be fantastic. We don't have anyone who's stepped forward to fund that, to say that they're ready to do that. But of course, if we find that, I think that the ladies, would you all agree that you would come and be a part of that?
Definitely.
So if the opportunity presents itself, yes. And another thank you has come in. So that looks like all the questions that have been asked or attendees want to ask tonight. And I just want to talk about again what's coming next Thursday. I can't stress that enough, that we're going to start with somebody says ask Professor Gates to produce that documentary. He is very busy and he has a ton that he is doing himself, and I would love that. Oh, people are giving me all these ideas. How about an NSDAR special projects grant for that? I love all these ideas. If we can pull it off, I certainly would definitely welcome the opportunity. So next Thursday, Daughter Dialogues goes live for season 2. And what we will start off with is, this is amazing, right? In commemoration for Black History Month, we will begin with the very first Black member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, Karen Batchelor. I finally got her story. It took me a while, and we got it. And we spent literally, you won't believe this, we spent 6 hours recording because I wanted to get everything. This is the most historically significant interview that I will do for Daughter Dialogues. Everyone's story is important, but she was the first. She was the first Black member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, admitted in 1977. I didn't want to miss anything. So we recorded for 6 hours. I got it down to 3.5, the final product. So that's too much for anyone to listen to all in one episode. So I will be releasing her story over 3 episodes, 3 weeks. So the first week will be basically what shaped her into someone that would want to do that, be the first Black member of the DAR. Like, what formed her into this person of courage and resilience to go up against what she had to overcome in order to be a member and be a pioneer really in that space. So how did she become that person? That's the first week. The second week after that, she talks about her genealogy research. So week 2, the second weekend, second Thursday and Thursday, she will talk about how she did her genealogy research and how she discovered her Revolutionary War patriot, William Hood, who's a white Revolutionary War patriot. How did she discover this in 1977 when there wasn't the internet just yet? And we also hear stories that aren't necessarily related to the patriot, which are stories about her family oral history and about her Jenny Daisy Hood, which was her white maternal great grandmother, and what happened when she married a Black man, Prince Albert Weaver, in 1889. Again, that's on her patriot line, her great grandmother, what happened when she married a Black man in 1889. And she talks about her enslaved paternal, so on the other side of her family, her paternal great grandmother, Charity Ann. She talks about her being torn away from her mother as a child because she was enslaved. So her enslaved paternal great grandmother, Charity Ann. She talks about that story. And then the third episode, Karen discusses being admitted into the DAR in 1977 as the first known Black member by defying resistance within the society. Hear what she had to go up against and how it took a village for her to prevail. There are stories that she didn't learn until decades later that happened behind the scenes. There are stories about blackballing. So there literally were white balls and black balls, and there was a vote. There's a lot of information there about what happened that she found out just pretty recently. And how did she overcome hearing about that? She felt pain from knowing some of the stories. She already knew the resistance that she faced when she was applying, right? Because it was very hard for her to even find a chapter that would accept her. Who came to help her? What was this village that she's talking about? It took a village. And finding out later about the system of the blackballing and how it made her feel, and how did she heal from that? She did something very remarkable to heal from this revelation that she came to pass more recently. So I want you to come hear that. Again, go to daughterdialogues.com, go to Dialogues and you will find the podcast, or anywhere that you get your podcast. Subscribe to the newsletter at daughterdialogues.com, because I will send out reminders that say what's coming up next. You won't miss anything. You'll get invitations to events such as this when we have them again. And support us by following us on social media at Daughter Dialogues on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And thank you again for everyone for joining. And we will see you soon next Thursday, not in person as far as live, but we'll be here. The daughters will be sharing more of our stories. Thank you. Good night.
All right.